Okay, hi everyone. Claire Wasserman here, founder and author of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform, global community, and a book all about helping women earn more and live better. Boy, did it take me years to figure out that elevator pitch. It's like it takes longer to figure out how to say shorter sentences. And that's what we're here today to do. I host these job seeker support groups as often as I can. Sometimes it's me coaching somebody or a few folks live. Other times it's just pure networking. But today it's going to be a little bit more webinar-ish style. It's still interactive. The focus is on nailing your elevator pitch. So figuring out by the end of this, hopefully you'll walk away with just a really concise, compelling, introductory sort of statement about who you are. We have a special guest, April Lucar, who specializes in this stuff, who's going to be taking over for me in just a minute. But before we get to her, I am going to be asking Marissa Rodriguez to come up here. If you've come to my job seeker support groups before, you know that I love to invite back folks who are in the community who used to be a job seeker, but guess what? They got their job. So by the way, if that ends up being you, if you find work and you post about it on LinkedIn, which you should, and you came to these or benefited at all from Ladies Get Paid, please tag me and Ladies Get Paid because well, A, it makes me feel good, but B, I want to learn from you. I want to hear, top 5 tips of what, was most useful to you throughout your job seeker journey, AKA give us hope. So we have Marissa here today, who is that person. So I'm going to have her unmute and come up to the proverbial stage. There we go. So Marissa, I'm going to have you for the next couple minutes. Tell us kind of, well, A, congratulations, but B, yeah, tell us kind of what your biggest takeaways were from the time that you were looking for work, maybe even how long you were looking for work, and just kind of, like I said, give some hope to the rest of the community who is feeling that in between, which can be so hard, but doesn't last forever, which you've proven.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be here to be able to share some of my lessons during this period that I was in. So I was unemployed for 6.5 months. Was completely unexpected and blindsided by it. My background is in higher education, and I was working at an ed tech startup. So I was not prepared for this time when I got laid off. And I'll say too that it has always been one of my biggest fears to be in this space. I've always been an extremely overachiever and hard worker in order to avoid a situation like this happen. And then here I was in that space regardless and trying to figure out like how to navigate it. So I think for me, my biggest takeaway during this period was really just trying to focus on finding other ways to be productive outside of just applying for jobs. Like I started volunteering at a nonprofit in Los Angeles where I worked with current students in underserved communities to help them interview and prepare for when they would be finishing up their college degree. I was really focused on improving my mental health, my emotional, spiritual, and physical health. I started working out about 4 or 5 times a week. To me, it helped me get this like frustration and energy out. And I took it out on the gym. And so, this whole process of being in the space, it can really bring you down. And so I think just being really intentional about what you're doing with that energy and putting it in positive places helped keep me at a good pace. Like, not to say that I didn't have bad days or those times when you get the rejection email, that sort of thing, but I found outlets to kind of drive that energy. I learned a couple of new skill sets. So I started I knew that I wanted to learn how to invest, and I started taking financial classes on understanding the stock market better and making sure that eventually when I would get a job and start making money again, I would be very intentional with how I was spending and investing my money. I started to learn how to do a side hustle. I learned about short-term rental leasing and being able to scale what that looks like, which is kind of like Airbnb, and doing that as a side business. So basically just finding projects that I had always wanted to do, but I never got the chance or never had the mental capacity when you're working a full-time job and you're just spent at the end of the day. And it helped me feel like I was being productive. So there were about 3 months that I was getting absolutely no traction. I got no interviews. I couldn't even get the rejection email. Like it was just complete dead silence. And on the flip side, I was still doing things that I was feeling productive, that felt like I was moving forward, regardless of what was happening on the job side. And I think that that just like really helped me feel like I was still making traction and gaining new insights and driving towards goals that I wanted to accomplish. And I think that that really helped me keep the positive mindset and just kind of stay focused on, okay, this is going to be a period of time where one, you have this space. So really kind of leaning into that, but it's there's going to be an end in sight. And it really helped me to kind of just like stay focused, stay positive, and kind of be able to see that there was going to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
I love that. And everybody we've had on has gotten a job, I think everyone said something different. And this was so necessary and important. Can you tell us where you got your job? And of course, drop your LinkedIn into the chat so we can all connect with you. And if your company ends up hiring, remember us.
Yeah. So I'm working at another educational technology company. I will say it kind of happened in a funny way because it was not something I normally would have applied to.
Oh.
It was a little bit outside of the work that I was doing originally. The company's called Re-Up. So essentially what we do is we help those who have dropped out of college get re-enrolled back into college, and then provide them all of the support that's needed as they're enrolling, but then also when they start continuing their education. And so yeah, I was hesitant about applying, and then I did, and now it ended up being so much more of a better situation than I ever could have imagined. I'm actually loving my job, which I know it sounds weird to kind of be in that space, but I definitely went a little bit outside of my comfort zone, and I went with it. And yeah, now I'm at a place that I've been really happy with, and loving the people that I work with, and loving the responsibilities that I have. So I know that they are have a couple of openings at that company, so I'll make sure to provide my information. And if ever anyone wants to connect, to ask, to get advice or anything, I'm more than open. This space here also really helped me kind of get through this period. And I know that I had connected with a handful of people when I was in your shoes. And so I'd be more than happy to connect with anybody outside of this.
Yes, thank you. Last question is, when you said it was a little bit out of your comfort zone, I guess my question is what, got you over the hump of I shouldn't apply? And also, did that work you were doing, the volunteer work that you were doing as kind of the, stopgap side hustle, did that help you end up getting your full-time job?
It didn't, but it allowed me to kind of expand my network.
Mhm.
They actually offered me contract work from doing the volunteer. I wasn't able to take it because it was going to be too much on top of my full-time job. I ended up getting that around the same time frame. But I think just being able to expand the network was kind of like the key piece to it. As for getting outside of my comfort zone, I honestly, yeah, I really had to like push myself. And I truly felt that like what was meant for me was going to be meant for me. And in this case, that was like 100% the case. So I think it was more so just kind of going with my intuition of, okay, this isn't exactly what you expected your next job title to be. I was doing marketing responsibly, like growth marketing, and my job is called a project analyst. Like those things do not align. However, my responsibilities within that role is exactly the type of work I was doing. So just kind of trusting the process was really what I had to do to lean in. And like the fruits of being able to do that now, like I'm so grateful for the fact that I, went outside my comfort zone, applied, went through the process. I was actually very transparent with them in the interview process that I wasn't quite sure if I was the right candidate. And I knew that was kind of risky in doing that, but it allowed us to have very authentic conversations. And I think ended up serving me better in the long run, that I ended up still getting the role and it was completely the right fit.
And it was a way of gauging, is this a culture that's going to be open to your growth, the learning curve that will happen, and work with you on that. Marissa, you best. You gave us even more lessons than I expected. So thank you for being here. And if you need to actually go do your work now, then good, you don't need to stick around. So I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the first screen and welcome our special guest, April, up here. So asked to unmute, pinned to this first screen. Okay, so April, thank you for doing this. And I just have a quick question for you. Why, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself in just a second, but first, since we're talking about elevator pitches, why is this something that is so angsty? I mean, it's just a couple of sentences and like we have full-blown existential crises about this. By the way, no matter if you're, transitioning between jobs, because that can be even harder, right? Like, who am I without my job? So that I understand. But what is it about elevator pitches that makes people so nerve-wracked about it? And then also maybe talk about your own passion for it and what you do, and then you can take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. I think with all of the people that I've worked with to help make their networking pitch, their elevator pitch, I use those terms interchangeably, by the way, so you'll hear me say either. I think it really comes down to that idea that we have in our heads that a first impression, like, is it right? You can't go back on a first impression. And so I think we put that pressure on ourselves to say all the amazing things and like not stumble and not give the wrong impression with that first introduction. So I think a lot of it is just that pressure that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's so hard, like you said at the beginning, Claire, it's so hard to say less and make it impactful. Right. That's the thing that I think, if Twitter has taught us anything, that it's hard to say things in very few characters. And so we've gotten better at it, I think, as a society over time, but it's still that thing that it's so hard to look at ourselves from outside and say, what's interesting about me? What do I want to tell people? What do I want to say that's going to make them want to learn more? And that's really, I think, what kind of the elevator pitch comes down to, right? Is opening up those conversational threads to make people interested and want to talk with you more. And so I think if we just kind of think of it from that standpoint of what can I say that's going to make them want to have a conversation, rather than I need to say who I am in 10 words or less.
Right.
It kind of changes our mindset and shifts our perspective a little bit.
By the way, I'm going to just make sure everybody's on mute real quick. Let me do it before I have you take it away. And then I'm also seeing some good advice, people saying they have some good advice in that chat. Always love to hear that. But April, would you like to give us kind of an overview? Well, tell us who you are first and foremost, because I did a shit job at that. So give us your own
No, you're fine.
Elevator pitch, and then give us the structure for today. Hold on one second. Let me mute everybody and then ask you to unmute. Okay, perfect. Yes. Yeah. So tell us, who you are and what we're up to for the next 45, 50 minutes or so.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm April Lokar, and I help feminist entrepreneurs amplify their expertise with any number of things, including scalable offers. That's kind of my entrepreneurial elevator pitch. If I was to talk about my corporate elevator pitch, it would be a little bit different. And so that's one thing that I do will address a little bit when we get into it here, is kind of having maybe something that's a little bit different depending on who you're talking to. But we'll get to that. So we'll spend just a few minutes kind of talking through some of the elements of an elevator pitch, and then go through a couple of exercises on how to write your elevator pitch, because writing it down is really helpful, to be able to edit and revise and then practice. So yeah, I would love if we have the time, I think we will, to do, maybe like 10 minutes in breakout rooms, where you all can practice it with each other, because we have a lot of people here. So being able to just say it out loud to each other and get a little bit of feedback, will be really, really helpful. So don't run away or jump off the call if that is anxiety inducing. It's okay. You don't have to do it, but we'll get into breakouts and practice a little bit for anyone that's wanting to practice. So that's kind of where we'll go, is talking about what it is, how to do it, and then we'll do a little bit of practice. So you'll kind of get into it a little bit, and it will take time, and that's okay too. So just a couple things to keep in mind there. And Claire sent me a lot of great questions that you all submitted. So we will talk about some of those questions as well, because there's a lot of really great questions that were submitted ahead of time. So starting things off with, what is an elevator pitch, right? Like I said, I like to think of it as more an impactful introduction that makes the person you're talking with want to have a longer conversation. Right. It's just kind of getting them interested, starting that conversation. For those of you that are familiar with making any type of content for social media, you can think of that as like the hook, or, if you're writing a blog post, it's, what's that hook in the blog post that gets them to read more. So it's really thinking about, how can I open a conversation? And it doesn't have to say everything about you in 45 seconds, right? So just take that pressure off yourself a little bit, right, from the start, because I used to be that way as well. And I'm like, how can I say everything that I do in like 5 sentences? So in addition, I like to think of an elevator pitch as like 10 words or less. And that can be scary as well. We'll talk about how to get there. But the elevator pitch itself is like your one-liner. Like, what can you say about yourself in one sentence? And then you'll have, a couple of other key things that you can talk about. But it's that one sentence. So some of the components of an elevator pitch. The first one is identifying your objective. And I know that sounds super cliche and a little bit lame, because everything that I do in my corporate world is, learning and development. And so everything's about learning objectives and all that sort of thing. But the objective of why you're creating your elevator pitch, is it to find a job? Is it to expand your network? Is it to introduce yourself to colleagues, right? So thinking through, what is your objective? Are you trying to make professional connections? Are you meeting potential clients as an entrepreneur? And again, or are you introducing yourself in a job interview, right? Those are different objectives that might change a little bit of how you're saying what you're saying about yourself. Then the other thing is the target audience. So who are you talking to, right? Is it other entrepreneurs, if you're an entrepreneur? Is it professionals in your field? Who are you looking to connect with, and why, right? So maybe it's an ideal client, maybe it's a future employer, but keeping that in mind will, again, kind of help you think about, how can I introduce myself in a way that's going to carry on a conversation? And then the last thing I like to think about as part of the components of the elevator pitch is, what's unique about you? And that doesn't mean you have to have an existential crisis about who you are and all of that kind of thing, but really trying to bring something that you've learned through your career or some experience about yourself. It doesn't have to be super mind-blowing. I'm a pretty boring person, I think. And so I don't travel a lot. I don't do a lot of crazy stuff, but there are things that I can say about myself that are unique, especially depending on who I'm talking to and what the purpose of that introduction is. So thinking about those types of things will help you as we kind of get into how to write your elevator pitch. So I'm looking over at my notes here just to make sure I don't miss anything. So when it comes to how to write your pitch, there's a couple of things that I like to think about. So if you have notes that you're taking, these are things you're going to want to write down. And I can send this to Claire to kind of send out afterwards as well. What does your work look like in practice? So what I mean by that is, what's the result of your work? And that can be the hardest thing for us to think about for ourselves. So you may need to phone a friend to help you with that piece, right? If it's somebody you've known in your work life for a while, sending them a text and saying, hey, what am I really good at? Or, hey, what do I help people do? And just seeing what they say, right? And that can be scary to ask. But I encourage you to do it, because getting other people's perspective on what you do can be really enlightening. I've never had that come back in a bad or scary way for myself or any of my clients. I know we're always afraid of what other people are going to say, but phoning a friend and just asking, hey, what am I good at? That kind of helps open up a little bit of your own perspective if you're having a tough time identifying that. The other thing that you can do is, if you're familiar with like Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement, you might know of the 5 whys. And if you're not, I'll tell you what it is right now, right? But I like to use the 5 whys to go deeper on what the result of my work is. So what am I doing for people? Okay. And then kind of asking, well, why? What do they get out of that? What's the result? And then asking that question multiple times, usually around 5 times, will get you to like the deepest answer of what it is that you're doing for them. So for example, if I said, in my corporate job, I am managing a learning and development team. Okay, well, why? What do they get out of that? Right? Well, the team gets, strategy around what they're doing. Well, what does that help them do? It helps them to do their jobs better, and they get clarity, right? So you can kind of keep going down that path for whatever it is that you're doing, to get a little bit of a deeper understanding. So that's one way, but essentially looking at what does your work look like in practice will kind of help you identify all of those things. The other thing I like to think about is, whether you're an entrepreneur or, in any other field, if you are an employee seeking work, all of that kind of thing, what are the pain points that you're serving for your client or your employer, right? It can be any number of things, but just think about, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? So that's another component of it. Then after that, I like to write a first draft of how I introduce myself. So just think who you are and what you do, and jot down a first draft of what you might say. So we can take just like 30 seconds for you to jot something down and just write out like how you would introduce yourself to somebody. I'm so-and-so, and I blah, 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 right? So just kind of jot down a first draft there. All right, if you're not done, that's okay. That was really fast, but we're going to keep moving because a lot of people have lots of questions that I want to get us to at some point here. So just keep that as part of your process. Just write something down and write it how you would say it, right? Sometimes the way we write things is not the way we speak. Write it how you speak. So you may have to say it out loud to yourself so that it sounds like something you would say. That's just kind of an extra tip. The next question is usually the question that I'll ask any of my clients, and it's the one that makes them think the most. So the question is, picture yourself going into career day at an elementary school, and you're going to go talk to third, fourth, fifth graders. How would you introduce yourself to them? To like a bunch of 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. And if you don't know any 10 or 11-year-olds, picture one. But how would you introduce yourself to like a fifth grader? And try to think of it that way, because that helps us to really simplify what it is that we do, right? Especially if you're in a field that's very specialized, or not everybody quite understands what you do and you're trying to make that more clear. Think of it as though you're going to career day at an elementary school. If that's too hard, think about a high school first and going and introducing yourself to a bunch of teenagers. Don't worry about them judging you or anything like that. They're nicer than we give them credit for. But think about introducing yourself to like teenagers first, if the elementary school kid is too hard to simplify, and then go that extra level of, okay, now in elementary school. So I think that exercise gives us a little more clarity on being simple with how we're introducing ourselves. Then once you kind of have that in place, do a little check-in. Are you using jargon in your pitch? If it's something that's industry specific, if it's something that like Chat GPT would write for you, things of that nature. If it's very jargony, take out the jargon, right? And simplify. And again, thinking about how would you introduce yourself to like fifth graders, I think it helps us to simplify the jargon as well, because they don't know all the industry terms. And a lot of times we think that people that we're introducing ourselves to in our careers, we think that they know the same jargon that we know, and they don't always. So we don't want to assume that they know all the words that you're using. So, not in a condescending way, but keep it really simple. Simple is easier for everyone to understand. So identify, highlight any jargon that you have and pick a different word. The other thing to think about is ideally we want this to be 10 words or less for like your one-liner, your opener. It doesn't mean that's all you're going to say, but that one-liner, try to keep it to 10 words or less. And ideally, none of the words should be more than 2 syllables. And there's a little bit of give and take there depending on what the words are. Sometimes if it's the right word and it's an industry word that makes sense for you, that's okay. If it rolls off your tongue well, that's fine. But try to keep it to 2 syllables or less, because it's easier to say, it's easier for other people to hear and to understand and to absorb. So those are a couple of things that I like to keep in mind. So take out the jargon and keep it to 2 syllables or less. If you're a web developer, that's a good question. We can come back to that one. There are times where some of that makes sense. And again, that kind of goes back to who's your audience, right? If your audience is other web developers, they're going to know what you're talking about, right? And the jargon's okay. If it's, hey, I'm trying to introduce myself to a random networking group and I don't know who's there, you'll want to remove any of the jargon, even, HTML, JavaScript, all that kind of stuff. Not everyone's going to know what that is. A lot of people will, but we don't want to assume that they do. So sometimes it's going to depend on exactly who you're talking to. So that's a lot in a very short period of time. And these are things that you're going to want to go back and revise over and over. So yes, I can give an example. So like for me, my elevator pitch is I help feminist entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneur is a long word. It's not just 2 syllables, but it's the right word in that situation. So that part's okay. But I help feminist entrepreneurs amplify their expertise. That's not very long, right? So try to keep it to less than 10 words, 10 words or less. And that's not a hard and fast rule, right? And none of this is a rule. They're more just guidelines. But it's really trying to be more concise with what you're saying. The reason why is the more we have to say, the harder it is to remember. So you're having it as committed to memory when you are going to introduce yourself. And B, it's harder for the person you're talking to understand. And I don't mean that, again, not in a condescending way or anything of that nature. But think about when people are talking to you, if they go on and on and on and on and on, then you've already forgotten what they said at the beginning, right? And so we want to keep it really concise. The next step after having that like one-liner is to have maybe 3 key things you can talk about after that, right? So it might be, yes, I help entrepreneurs amplify their expertise is my one-liner. Kind of my next 3 points. So I help them create scalable offers. I help them write speeches, and I help them create digital courses and programs, right? So when you're talking to C-level executives, so they are looking for more, but not at the start, right? Usually when you're giving that introduction, you want just that one-liner to get people interested, right? And then that's where we can then add in more of what I do, how I do it, who I'm doing it for, things of that nature. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind. And then before we get into breakout groups or more questions, a couple of things to keep in mind once you have something written down is sit out loud as if you're meeting someone for the very first time, like 3's out. Are there any words that are kind of tripping you up? Are there words that are too long? Just get it in the habit of saying it is really going to help you out. And when you have your one-liner that you really like, update your bios on your LinkedIn with the same language. That way it's easy for people to see. It's something you're going to say and it's reinforced. So don't be concerned about like memorizing a script necessarily, but I think having something written down to work from will help. And then practicing using a couple of different words here or there, or practicing making it a little longer and see how that feels for you, right? Because again, these are guidelines, not hard and fast rules. So if you like 15 words, try it out, right? And see how that feels. And then practicing it, using it with real people, right? And it can be somebody that you meet randomly. It can be, trying to schedule a couple like informational interviews or coffee chats or things like that with people from these groups. That sort of a thing can be really helpful. You want to just make sure that it's coming across as natural and in your own voice. So again, that's where I say things that we write down it's not always how we speak. So make sure that what you're practicing isn't like the formal written copy. It's like your conversational tone. And so try to keep that in mind as well. And then the last piece that I'll talk about here before we like try this with each other is words might change over time. be flexible with how you're saying what you're saying. And again, trying it out with new people and different people and seeing. We'll get to some questions, but what I'd like everyone to do is get ready to practice an introduction with each other, and make sure that you at least speak something out loud. And again, I know that can be anxiety inducing. I know it can be a little scary, but we're all in this together. And it's not about having it perfect. It's really just about, getting something out there and working from that. The last thing that I'll say before we do breakout rooms is, if you are worried about, like, I have so much experience and it's not in the same industries, I have a lot of things, and I don't know how to put that all into like one sentence. If you're not sure how to take all your experience and put it into like one sentence as an introduction, you're not supposed to, right? So we don't want to have our entire resume distilled into one sentence, right? Or even 3 sentences. We want that introduction, again, to be a conversation starter. So think about, again, who you're introducing yourself to, what the purpose is, and build your elevator pitch for that, which means it could be different, right? Depending on who you're talking to. And you might have different ones. So practice one and get really good at that one. And then practice another one for maybe just meeting colleagues, or practice, another one for meeting clients if you're in that type of a space. So just focus on one for the moment, and then you can build out other versions, right? Depending on who you're talking to. And the more you practice it, the more natural it will become to like make those little modifications depending on who you're talking to. So let's try some breakout rooms. Claire.
April, can I jump in? So
Yeah.
my Zoom kicked me off, so I'm so glad that you were a co-host. And I think you kind of just answered it, but did you address Amanda's question? Because there were a few folks who wanted to know the answer to it. It was, so any suggestions for this process if you're open to multiple job types? For example, if someone has 2 to 3 target roles, would you have one elevator pitch for each one, or one that threads those together is more flexible? You sort of just answered it, but I just want to flag it because there were a few folks who said they also were interested in the answer.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of that depends on how different those target roles are. If they're at all related, then I think you can do a little more like high level networking pitch. Because of your background, it's not trying to distill your resume into a sentence. So absolutely a different pitch for each one. But I like to try and keep that open as much as possible. So what I mean by that is, I like to focus on who the target audience is of that networking pitch, rather than the target of the role that I'm using it for. So into a few different roles, there's probably going to be some through line into those. Maybe they're all, I don't know, knowledge worker fields, or maybe they're all, service based or something like that. So thinking about what's the thing that kind of ties those together. Maybe they're all about helping clients, or maybe they're all, in a similar field in general, but the roles are a little bit different. So kind of thinking about how you can maybe take it a couple steps back and make it really high level from what you're saying, so that it can open yourself to those multiple areas. So it might be, giving a high level introduction, but then again, kind of those like next 3 maybe bullet points that you can talk about would be, hey, I can do this thing, that thing, that thing. So you can kind of weave it in there a little bit to keep it a little more open.
Cool. I think that's also why elevator pitching can be so hard, because you're striking this balance between thing that's like open enough for somebody to fit themselves into, but also not so open that it's abstract, right? Or jargon. Also, it might be my internet, but on my end, at least, your internet's really jumping around. So I don't know if you want to plug in your Ethernet while people are doing breakouts. Speaking of which, do you have the technical capacity on your end to be able to do the breakouts, or do you need me to?
Looks like I can. Let's go.
All right, looks like your internet's fine for other people. So yeah, it's mine. And if I get knocked off again, you're the co-host. I'll keep joining.
All good. Now, all right, let's go. All right, you're gonna have like 3 to 4 people per room. So we're gonna give you about 10 minutes. So like move it along, and you're really just giving an introduction and getting a little bit of feedback on, hey, do I understand what you do? Is this kind of a conversation starter? And so give each other just a quick bit of feedback, but really it's more about speaking it out loud and introducing yourself, and getting some practice at that. So 3 to 4 people in a room. If you can come off camera, that's great. If you can at least just unmute and introduce yourself, that's awesome too. So we'll get that started right now. Let's see. All right, open all rooms. Okay. You may have to join. There we go. I think we're good. Okay. All right, and if you're still here, then you've either stepped away or you haven't clicked join your room yet. So if you can, go ahead and do that. And if not, that's all right. You can hang out here for a couple of minutes.
Also, it could mean technical difficulties. And so I find if you are struggling to join, just click out of Zoom and then come back in. And you should probably be put automatically into your room. Really?
I've been that person before where like I wasn't able to like join from my phone, and it sometimes does weird things.
Yeah, but I do find that, if you come out and go back in, that should work.
Yeah.
4, 2, 3. I know for the people with the only 2 and the people who have 4, I almost wonder if you want to reassign anybody. Add so that those who have 2, because 4 is a lot in a room.
4 is a lot.
So room 3 has 4 people in it.
Yeah.
Feel bad about kicking it, moving somebody out at this point, but I don't know.
I think we can probably leave them for the moment. The one that has 2, maybe we can. They'll probably be all right.
Yeah.
All right. And yeah, there were a lot of really great questions that were submitted. Okay. So Claire, you're not in your normal.
No, I'm in Coronado. I'm in
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
I was in Coronado for the month. Well, I guess we're recording right now, so let me just pause recording.
Some of you were probably sitting there already finished. Others of you were probably still having conversations. So there's never a perfect balance. All right. So hopefully that was helpful for those of you that were able to speak it out loud to each other. And I was just telling Claire, like, I know this is a little rushed. Usually, this takes a little bit of time to think through. But I hope this gives you at least a good starting point of different things to think about. And again, I always go back to the question of, or the scenario of introducing yourself to elementary school kids at career day. I think that is like the most helpful to make sure it's super clear what you do. So kind of keep that in mind. So I know we have a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we'll go through a couple of those. And if you have other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Claire can help me to see all the chat, because as I'm looking at other questions, sometimes I miss things in the chat. So the first question that was submitted here that I see is, how do you answer the dreaded "tell me about yourself" question? They said, I imagine it's similar to an elevator pitch. How would you summarize yourself, work history into just a minute or two or less? So I think that's kind of what we've done today, right? If somebody gives you the "tell me about yourself" question, they're probably not the best interviewer. So just to be, have your like yellow flag up on that you want to make sure that you're doing your part to carry on a conversation in that interview. But tell me about yourself really is like, give me your elevator pitch. That's what most people want out of that question. So don't go into like personal details and things like that. Unless like your dog is the most important thing in your life to you. I love my dog too, but try to keep that out of like your "tell me about yourself" answer, unless they specifically say like, hey, any personal stuff you want to share, but try to keep it away from things that are too personal. The next question, I would love to be considered for the session. Okay. I get excited and I ramble. Figuring out a concise way to say who I am and what I do is something I've been working on for years, and I just can't pin it down. All right. The trick that I have for people that tend to ramble, on your phone or wherever you can use voice notes, I like to try to practice introducing myself while recording myself on voice notes. Not on video, because that brings a whole other component of like, oh, I looked crazy or whatever, right? Or, oh, I'm not ready to like put myself on video. You can do like a selfie video. That's great. But at least start with like recording yourself, just introducing yourself, like in the car while you're in a parking lot ready to go into Target to buy groceries or something. But use the voice notes on your phone or whatever you can do that's like that, and just practice, and literally like set a timer for like 45 seconds, and don't let yourself speak longer than that, and it'll get you in the habit of saying things faster, and not faster rate of speech, but more quickly. So you don't want to speak too quickly, and that'll kind of help you get in the practice of doing that. You don't even really have to listen back to it, is kind of the trick, because that puts all sorts of other things on us, where we start judging the sound of our voice and all that sort of thing, right? So the trick is just to practice doing it. But by having like the voice note recording, it's really, sorry, clearly there's someone at my door. By having the voice notes recording, it sort of puts that pressure on you to like actually do it. So that's why I like to do it that way. All right, then the next question. So this is actually a good question, and Claire, I might throw this one to you. So it says, I think I self-eliminate in the job hunting process by feeling like I'm asking employers to take a chance on me. How do I project or maintain confidence when I feel like my resume is lacking or my experience just doesn't stack up?
Yeah, it's a much longer response that I have for that, but I would say really look at the difference between, is there actually a gap? And I've said this before in previous sessions, but is there an actual gap, whether it's a skills gap, a knowledge gap, an exposure gap that you have, versus the fear that you don't, right? Or that it's not good enough. tangibly speaking, if you can really just as objectively as possible determine the difference between that, and then make a plan if there truly is actual gaps, right? Skill gaps, knowledge gaps, exposure gaps. What are ways that you can start gaining that? And it could be having conversations with people in the job, you know, and asking them about their greatest challenges and what they wish they'd known coming into it or whatever. So then you can kind of hang your hat on, at least I'm working towards it, right? And that shows self-motivation. There's a lot to be said about folks who pivot, you know, who come, you know, who make the leap, I mean, that's a great story to tell, right? Versus somebody who has this quote perfect resume. And also that, you know, your ability to get over a learning curve. We want to know that as the employer, so that there's a lot to say, actually, if you are in that lacking. And then if you've determined, no, actually, I sort of have everything it takes, and this is more of a self-confidence issue, then that's please come connect with me. I love that's divorcing is so hard to do in a capitalist society, but divorcing kind of who you are, so your self-worth and your identity from what you do, right, and how you are paid. Really being able to find value in yourself, irregardless of your job, and knowing that that's a lifelong process. But I would just, again, hang your hat on, I'm working on it. Like if you are working on it and seeing progress, it doesn't mean it's linear, right? You're going to take the step back, but the fact that you keep trying, like there's gain confidence in that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that, as you were saying that, it does remind me of something that I like to tell people is everyone has expertise in something, right? And so it may not be super clear to you what that expertise is, because you're like, oh, I've worked in marketing for my career, but I kind of want to do this thing now. Well, what did you learn in marketing that transfers to other things, right? If you played sports, right? Well, okay, maybe that doesn't translate directly to the job you're doing now, but maybe you learned teamwork and leadership and things of that nature, right? So like, that's where I kind of go back to that exercise of texting, you know, 2 to 3 people that know you really well and just asking, what am I really good at? And that can kind of help with that confidence piece. And kind of filling in those gaps, because chances are they're not going to tell you, oh, you're really, really good at macros in Excel. Like they're not going to tell you that unless that's like really your thing. But they're going to tell you something that's like probably hard to put into a box of a career category. And that's kind of the next step is like, oh yeah, I'm a really good listener. Okay, well, what does that mean for my career? You know, so you can kind of take things, but it's also like a confidence boost because they usually tell you nice things. So, okay, the next question is, how do we respectfully yet effectively write our elevator pitch in a 300-character personalized LinkedIn invite message? So that is a great question. I think if you focus on what we've done today and get like that one-liner, that's probably going to fit in like that space of just a short, you know, LinkedIn invite message. But also when you're reaching out to people to connect with them on LinkedIn, if it's a cold outreach, you know, you probably know them from something or from somewhere. And so, you know, adding in a little bit of like, hey, you work in the same industry and I'm trying to grow my network, you know, usually people accept those, even if it's kind of random. So Claire, any other advice on like the LinkedIn invite messages?
We have lots of material on LinkedIn, so make sure you've signed up for ladiesgetpaid.com. We've got a free newsletter. We've got a whole LinkedIn checklist, guidebooks. So get involved in our community and you'll learn more.
Yeah, perfect. And then another one here. And I realize if you have to go, that's totally fine. We'll hang on for a couple more minutes and answer a few more of these questions. But if you have to go, we totally understand. So I'm trying to broaden my search beyond the industry I've spent my whole career in. How do I express this in my elevator pitch? So that's where we talk about kind of taking that step back, right? And not being so focused on specific skills. And, you know, that's kind of where that jargon comes in, right? And thinking a little more broadly about what are the other skills that you've learned? What are other areas where you have some expertise that are beyond that industry? One example that I have is I had started my career after I pivoted out of education. I started my career working for a nonprofit. And when they laid me off, I needed to find something. And I was open to kind of anything at that point that was at all related to what I was doing. And I interviewed at this company that was a custom cabinet manufacturer, not at all related to blood banking, which is what I was used to. And the interviewer, I said, "Hey, do you have any hesitations?" And he said, "Just the industry, it's so different." And like something came over me and I said, "I can learn any industry. Like what I do is what I do. The industry doesn't matter." And I got that job. And that actually was like the best manager I've ever worked for. And he was a great mentor. And I have a whole career story about that for a different time. But thinking outside of the industry, focus on your skill sets at like the highest level. And I think focusing on that, the industry doesn't often matter that much unless it's something really, really niche. How to sound confident and clear when you introduce yourself as your value you can provide versus a title at networking events. Oh yeah, that's Claire could go on and talk about that for hours, I think, if we wanted to. But one thing I'll say about that is I tend to, at this point in my career, not even include a title of what I do. I tend to talk more about what I do rather than the titles that I have. So yeah, how to sound confident and clear with that. Practice, honestly, is going to be your best bet.
And I would say, I'm just going to add my,
yeah.
You may have said this earlier today, the problem that you solve for people.
Yeah.
I think that's where we should really be focusing. It's going to help you figure out your elevator pitch, but also it's going to just be, I think, compelling to folks, the problem that you solve for them. And then hopefully we're passionate about what we do, or there's like, we can really dig into the purpose, of the why. What part of solving that problem or who we solve that problem for do we care? You can kind of tap into that. You're going to give off a really positive energy that's just magnetic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of goes along, we're starting to kind of see the threads that tie all of these together. So as an entrepreneur, is there a different way to deliver an elevator pitch? Based on how we've walked through writing your elevator pitch, again, focusing on who am I talking to and what's my objective, that's going to point you in the right direction, no matter what, if you're an entrepreneur, a corporate employee, or anything else. Then this one is, I have a varied background with marketing, e-commerce, operations, account management experience. How can I focus my elevator pitch? Right now, saying I can do anything doesn't really work, but I also don't want to miss out on opportunities by being too specific. So that, I think, is in general job seeker advice, thinking about what do you really want to do. And that doesn't mean industry, that doesn't mean job title, but like what type of work do you want to do, right? Like what suits you, what fits into your style, things that you've learned, the expertise that you've picked up along the way. And I think focusing on that more so than the actual, like, again, job titles and things like that, can really help. Because yeah, saying like, I can do anything for anyone, while we feel that way, it's not always, true, right? Because we're not going to go work on a construction site if that's not our expertise, right? But we might love doing financials for somebody. So thinking about what's the like bigger thread that pulls everything together that you've done in the past, right? Whether with marketing and e-commerce and operations and account management, it sounds like you like working with clients and providing a good customer experience, or things like that, right? So thinking about going deeper on like the why behind what you're doing, I think can really help there.
Mm-hmm. One thing is, and also just this goes back to what April had said earlier about starting with the target. What's going to resonate most with the other person that you're speaking with?
Yeah.
So remind yourself of that, but also it's not bad to humanize yourself. So I'm sort of a huge fan of being transparent about your struggle in a certain sense, right? Let's not go
Yeah.
too personal. But, say what the elevator pitch that you think will be the most compelling. But you can also say, by the way, I also consider myself a generalist. And let me tell you, like, whatever, like you could just say that. It's like kind of hard for me to put into words exactly what I do, especially because I'm transitioning. But here's the problem that I'm most interested in solving right now. Right. And
Yeah.
then the other person can go, oh my God, me too. Right. That, like, humanizing yourself. Now you can make a genuine connection with the other person. So
Yeah.
I always am a fan of, just like, if you're nervous when you're interviewing, it's okay to say I'm nervous because I care. I want this job. That's endearing,
Yeah. Absolutely. And this kind of goes along with that. How do you create an elevator pitch when your background is really diverse and you don't know what direction you're going? Yeah, I think saying like, I'm open, or I'm, pivoting careers, or, wherever it is that you're at, like Claire said, I think being transparent about that, in a positive way. And, again, I know you've all talked about, like, if you've gotten laid off, and, kind of keeping that positivity around it, is really, really helpful. But yeah, a diverse background is great.
Yeah, I would, it's interesting. It's like, again, striking this balance of where you say, yeah, I have a diverse background. I've done a lot of things. I could go in a lot of directions, but here's a problem I'm currently interested in solving.
Mhm.
So you're able to say both, but think about, how could the other person help you? So give them something concrete where they can now take that and say, have you thought about this? Or, oh, I know somebody in that, right? So you're not just sort of saying, it's just general thing. Like, what is the other person gonna do with that? So I would just end it as best you can in some direction that allows the person, like I said, to like continue the thread.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this one I love. How can I give a good, impactful pitch without sounding braggy? I think that is a very small chance that you actually sound braggy, first of all. So I think having the confidence, is a great thing. And so I think the way you avoid sounding like, there was another question about, like, without sounding car salesman-y. So without sounding like you're selling yourself, if you're being truthful about, like, what you do and problems you solve, even if you throw in there like, hey, I've done this really big thing, as long as you're being, transparent about what you've done, who you've done it for, I don't think that's a problem to sound braggy. And again, I think the risk of sounding braggy is really, really minimal. And so I don't want to say that's not a problem, because for some people, that are extra confident, I've worked with some people like that too, and it can be like, okay, yeah, tone it down just a little bit. But again, if you're focused on like who you're talking to, and making sure that it's addressing a need that they have, or like we were just talking about, right, having those conversational threads of, hey, how can you help me, how can I help you, whatever the case may be. I don't think the braggy part's going to be a big issue. Claire, anything you
Yeah, if
have?
you're talking to somebody, if you're, if this is in the context of trying to get hired, you're reassuring them that they're making a good bet on you, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is not about self-promotion, it's service promotion, right? You did a thing that helped an entity, not right, an organization or an individual. And so it's that, again, it's not actually about you, it's about the other person, and it makes them feel good. And again, if you feel like you want to be self-deprecating too, right? Like, and then we won this big award. And then you might say, well, I always feel like I'm being braggy when I say that. And now I'm also realizing that's such a female thing for me to say. Like, you can sort of, be,
Yeah.
again, if there's a way to humanize what you're saying, do it, because that'll allow connection for the other. We're 12 minutes over, so I'm gonna, and this was free, so I always want to be conscious of our guest time. So April, if there's last words of wisdom you want to give, and then I'll tell everybody kind of next steps from here. I thought this was
Yeah.
super helpful, and I appreciate everybody, sticking around.
Yeah. Like I said before, I think the biggest thing that you can do is practice speaking it out loud, even if it's to yourself while you're sitting alone in your house or your car or whatever. But just trying to give yourself like a 30-second timer and, practice introducing yourself, because that will get you in the habit of staying concise. And then the words, you can find them from there, right? And don't worry about it sounding the same every time. It doesn't have to sound the same. Just think about, how can I get across generally who I am and what I do in a way that they'll want to carry on that conversation even more.
Mm-hmm. And how can people find you, follow you, and most importantly, pay you?
Yeah. So for clients, I have a session where we do this like in a more brainstormy way, and it's like 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, we get you to a point where you have your pitch. So that's available on my website. I can put the link in here, and definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I have a corporate job as well. And so they're hiring often, mostly in the LA area, but sometimes they have things that are remote. So if you look at Niagara Water, or Niagara Bottling, I forget how they list it now, but if you find any jobs there that you are interested in, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat with you about the company, and always be a referral for anyone that fits a position there. So hit me up on LinkedIn, and happy to help you in any way that I can.
Awesome. And we're going to put this all in the email that I send afterward with the recording. Last thing I would say about elevator pitching, I used to be very, very stressed about it. I'm somebody who had a job title in years past that was Master of Ceremonies. Okay. So what is that? Right. So one thing that was a really big game changer mindset shift for me was, instead of stressing about, oh my gosh, my elevator pitch, because it was ever evolving, I saw that as a negative. Instead, I decided to see that as indicative of my growth, better understanding of who I am, what I do, what I give a shit about. Okay. And then knowing, like, assuming it is going to evolve. It should evolve. That doesn't mean my other elevator pitches were bad. Okay. So I find it fun, the process of seeing how it changes over time, depending on what I do or who I'm talking to, and my understanding of self. So expect it to change, embrace the change. Ladiesgetpaid.com/join. I'm going to give a shout out to our pro members, because April is a pro member. This is a benefit of being a pro member. If you have any kind of expertise that you think can help other people, less than $15 a month. We have lots of benefits, like group coaching with me every month. You get member matching, access to hundreds of hours of content, and these opportunities to speak, right? So I think everyone's an expert in life, just a way of just sharing it, or in an articulate, humanized way. So join ladiesgetpaid.com/join. There is a free version, of course, in our community. But by upgrading, you'll be investing in yourself and also in us. Job seeker support groups, we started weekly, we went to bi-weekly. I may go to monthly, because again, this is free. We need to make money, and I love you guys, but we have to figure out our balance of what we're able to give for free versus pro membership. So I really do encourage you, if you are able to pay less than $15 a month, please do so. Again, I'll put that in the link. And then also my own LinkedIn. And if you get a job, like I said at the beginning with Marissa, tag me so we can have you come and speak. So also on Instagram, if you want to follow us, Ladies Get Paid. I'm also Claire Gets Paid. Velma, welcome. It's your first of many. Hope to see you again soon. April, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you. So check your emails, everybody, for the next Eventbrite link, the recording. And also I'm going to be, as always, I always do a post on LinkedIn doing a little bit of a recap. I'd love y'all to post on my comment on LinkedIn, because that way you can get exposure to my 9,000 followers and connect with each other. So don't be afraid to use LinkedIn. That's the way that I saw Marissa, that she had gotten the job. Like, self-promotion? No, service promotion, right? So share your story. It's going to help other people. Thank you, April. Thank you to all of you. Happy Monday, or whenever you're watching the recording. Best of luck. This too shall pass. Lots of life lessons to be had during it. So soak it up as you can, and then share it with others. Thanks, y'all.